Today's gospel is similar to yesterday's gospel. The only difference is that today the gospel is taken from St. Matthew. And they speak about the call of discipleship. Today's gospel helps us to understand the saying of St. Mark's gospel, which we read yesterday. We are told that in St. Matthew's gospel, one of the scribes came up to him and said, "Master, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus replied, "Foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." I think the great thing about Jesus is that he is very candid with his would-be disciples, those who want to follow him. He does not promise them the rose garden, and he is very open with his would-be disciples, the consequences, the sacrifices in following him. Certainly, he did not preach a good life gospel, prosperity gospel, but truly the gospel that he preaches is the gospel of true freedom. And it is interesting, and indeed I think Jesus must have been truly inspiring, because of all peoples, the one who asked to follow him was a scribe. You know, scribes are legalistic people, and he himself was inspired by Jesus. Of course, we know at the very beginning of the gospel, Jesus saw the great crowds all about him. It's important, therefore, that when we want to follow Jesus, this man freely wants to follow him. And when you want to follow Jesus, then we discouraged you. But when you don't want to follow Jesus, then he calls you. He's a funny fella, because the second man said, "Sir, let me go and bury my father first." Jesus says, "Follow me and leave the dead to bury their dead." So, on one hand, we have enthusiasm. So the first man, full of enthusiasm, wanted to follow Jesus, and Jesus helped him to see things in perspective. The other one, he was enthusiastic, but so. Jesus says, "You follow me now." Now this is important for us because very often many people, they want to find fullness of life, but they are not ready to follow Jesus, really. So even for many Catholics, they are baptized, but how many really intend to be disciples of Jesus? To be disciples of Jesus really is to be aware of the sacrifices ahead of us. It means really a call to die to self. And it is true that Jesus had nowhere to lay his head, because the whole universe is his house. He is very open, very receptive, very available. And that is why Jesus reminds us the importance of this total availability. And so today in the gospel, we are reminded that for discipleship, we are called to be ready to make that sacrifice of following him. And that was the reason also in the first reading, where we are told that the people of God, according to prophet AMOS, although they were the chosen people of God, they did not observe the covenantal laws. Instead of practicing justice, they were actually cheating each other, and those who were in charge, the leaders especially, they were robbing the people. Being the chosen people of God is not enough until we also live that life. And so this is where I think for us as church, we need to really ask, how many disciples we have in the Catholic Church. We have so many great crowds, but few follow Jesus. Unfortunately, few take their Christian life seriously. And to take our Christian life seriously, Jesus tells us in today's gospel, is to put God at the center of our life. You know, when this man said to Jesus, "Let me go and bury my father first," it doesn't mean that the father has already died. Not yet, most likely. Okay? So Jesus says, "Follow me, leave the dead to bury their dead." This is interesting because it is important, because Jesus is not advocating not to have filial piety for parents, but it's a question of priorities. It's a question of focus. And I always believe, and this is very important in our relationship, husband, wife, children, whatever it is God the center of your life? I think that is most important. If God is the center of your life, everything will have its place. But when something else takes the center of your life, then you are totally out of focus. That's why it's so important. The response to this, mark this, you will never think of God. So, what is important for us is to see all things from the perspective of Christ. So if Christ is the center of your life, whatever we do, they will always be for the people that we love. When Christ is not the center of our life, then the person becomes our possession, the person becomes the one that we manipulate. So it's true, parents should love their children. But sometimes I don't think parents are really loving their children. You actually loving yourself out of a lot of insecurity, possessiveness, and therefore we don't do what is right for our children. So if we put God as the center, then we know how we should best love our spouse, our children, our parents. And this is very true, especially for priests. If Jesus is not the center of their life, then the ministry becomes the center, other things become the center, then he loses his perspective. So for me, in all that I do, I ask, whether Jesus is that center. If Jesus is the center in a human relationship, then that relationship will grow, will flourish, will blossom, because that couple becomes more loving, more caring, more forgiving than Jesus. But if Jesus is not the center, then you depend on your own love. I loved you, you loved me. But that will not last long, because then our love is insecure, our love is inadequate, it won't have the capacity. So Jesus is asking us, therefore, in today's gospel, if you want to follow him, it is more than just out of enthusiasm, but we really need to put him the center of our life. And so this is where we are called to respond to the call of God.